I've added a lot of blocks to Minecraft, and people often go about asking me how to add their own blocks to the game. And unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as you might expect. I've made some tutorials on the rather simple ways that you can add custom items to the game to get their textures to display and whatnot. I'll link that video in the iCard in the top right. It is the start of how you're going to go about adding your own blocks, so definitely check that out before you watch this video. Unfortunately, adding blocks to the game is a whole lot more complicated than simply adding items. And so this tutorial will teach you everything you need to know about my method of adding blocks to the game. Oh, and I did specify that this is my method of doing it because unlike adding custom items where there's literally only one way to do it, for custom blocks there are probably an infinite amount of ways to do it. My method causes pretty minimal lag, however it is a little bit complicated to set up. Before we dive into the method that we're going to use, let's start by understanding a bit of why we need to use this method and get a brief overview of how this method is going to work. As you know, I like to start with adding all of the context that you guys need before you start the actual development. Alright, so let's explain what the problem is. So here we have a Minecraft block. This is an oak log, and I can place it in the world and I can break it. And if I was in survival mode and I broke it, I would get the item back. And here we have a custom block. It's my sword TNT from the More TNT pack. I can place it in the world. Its texture will appear. It has a collision box I can jump on, and when you break it, you will get the item. Seems pretty simple, right? If you've watched my custom items tutorial, you might be thinking at this point that, okay, I have an oak log. Why don't I just give the oak log custom model data and then I'm done? Well, let's try that. So I've updated my resource pack, so if I give myself an oak log with custom model data, you'll see that when I get the item, it shows up as the custom crafting table from my other data packs. Well, perfect. Cool. We've done custom blocks, right? We have an oak log, we have our custom crafting table, but no, when we place it into the world, it still shows up as an oak log. The item we have changed to make look like a custom crafting table, but the block is still regular. And that's because we have the ability to change the item model of everything with custom model data, but the block model, which is separate, that's what's in the world here, is not able to be changed with custom model data. We could make it so that every oak log in the world uses this model here for the custom crafter. However, that's obviously not a good method because you will very quickly run out of blocks that you can use. And so that's where the method we're going to talk about in this video comes in. So in this tutorial, we are going to be making a red emerald block that can be placed down into the world. It will have a collision box, and when you break it, you get the item back. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Step 1, making our blocks model. Before we get started with actually making the blocks code, let's start with a model so we have something to work with. But before we do that, let's explain what we're actually using to display the block's textures. So the concept here is pretty simple. We want to place an actual block into the world. For example, let's use a red stained glass, which it has a collision box, right? And we can break it and we could place it into the world. So we want an actual block, and then we want to display a texture over this block. And we can do that with an item display. Item displays let you create something that sure looks like a block, but it's actually an entity that you can pass right through. So in this case, it's an entity that has a scale of 1.1, so it's slightly bigger than a regular block. And then the item that's being displayed by the item display is an item frame with a custom model data of whatever our model is. In this case, it's going to be 1. Yours is going to be different than that. So then from here, the concept's actually really straightforward. If we were to line up our item display when we summon it to be in line with the grid, and then you place a block inside of it, for the most part, it will look about right. This isn't quite lined up perfectly, but the method that I'm going to be using later in this video will line it up actually perfectly. But in this situation, you'll see that at least 3 of the faces end up looking perfectly fine. Alright, so with that in mind, let's briefly talk about how to set up your own item model that will serve as our blocks texture. Alright, so in our resource pack, we basically just set it up almost exactly like my custom items tutorial. So I would watch that tutorial if you haven't already. I'm not going to be covering everything that was covered in that tutorial because of how similar it is. But if you go to your assets folder, your Minecraft folder, and then in your models folder, we want to go to the item folder and then create an item frame.json model. Inside of the item frames model, we are going to have it override for custom model data. And if we have a custom model data of 1, we are going to have it instead load the model of tutorial / red emerald block. And I have made, like I said, a tutorial on how to set up all the custom model data. So that is as far as I'll go. Check out the item tutorial if you want more info. But what this means is in game, if we have an item frame, it will look perfectly normal. But if we give ourselves an item frame with custom model data 1, it will display as this model. And if we look back at our resource pack, if you go to the tutorial folder and you find the red emerald block, this is a pretty simple model that's basically just a cube that has our texture in here. If we load it in Blockbench, you'll see that it displays pretty much exactly as you would expect, where it's just a simple cube. And I mean, you could make this cube yourself by just creating a new voxel, going 16 on the size of all of these, and then just applying the texture to it like so. And that's all there is to it. And for the texture itself, it's simply in the Minecraft, it's in the Minecraft textures tutorial folder. It doesn't really matter where this is as long as it's referenced in your models file. Okay, so that is the end of step 1. By the end of step 1, just make sure that you have an item frame still displaying as normal, but if you give yourself an item frame with whatever custom model data you went with, that it displays as so. And with that, we are going to move on to step 2. Step 2 is detecting the placement of the item frame. All right, so at this point in the process, you've probably figured this out, but we are going to be using item frames to detect when and where we place the block. That's because item frames have a couple unique properties that can be really helpful. So of course we can place them on any side of a block, and they line up nicely in the center of the block and can just be pretty much just, they work like a block, right? But they also are an entity that we can detect. But the most important part is actually the entity tag part of the item frame. The item frame item, interestingly enough, if you give it to yourself with this entity tag, you can make it so when you place it, it has, say, like a stone block in it. But that's not all. You can put all sorts of data into this entity tag field. So this command here is going to give us a custom model data 1 item frame like we had earlier, but it's also going to have an entity tag that's going to tell us it should be invincible and invisible and fixed and silent, and have some tags. Tags are going to be really important because they're going to let us actually detect the item frame that was placed into the world and what exactly it's supposed to be. So in this case, we have a tag of was.itemFrameBlock and was.red emerald block. And if we give ourselves this and we place it down, you'll actually notice that this is going to work exactly like our red emerald block because of that extra data that we gave it. So that is the general idea for step 2. Let's make it as a data pack. All right, so we need to start, of course, with a data pack. In this case, we're going to be making the WASD custom blocks tutorial data pack. So just normal stuff, pack.mcmeta, the data folder. I have a Minecraft folder already set up, and I'm going to want to have the pack name folder, so I'm going to go with was.block for this. But of course, you'll want to name this whatever your pack name is. I have a tutorial on how to set up data packs in general, but in this case, it would probably be whatever your name is, and then whatever the pack that you're trying to make is called. Inside of the was.block folder, we're going to make 3 folders. We're going to need an advancements folder. This is advancements plural. We're going to need a functions folder, functions plural, and then we're going to need a loot tables folder. This is loot tables plural, divided or separated by an underscore. We're going to be starting with the functions, and then we'll do advancements, and then finally end with loot tables. So in the functions folder, we are going to start by making this .mc function file, and I'm just going to call it give items. This is how we're going to be getting our custom blocks for now. Inside of our give items function, we only need one command for now. This is going to be to give us our block. So in this case, we are going to give ourselves an item frame and then have it have a whole lot of data. And so for what's important is going to be, your display name. This can be however you want the name to appear in game. This would be something you would have learned about in the items tutorial as well. We'll need the custom model data so that the model that we made shows up. So make sure that this value here matches whatever custom model data in your item frame model is. And then we need this entity tag that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Technically, all that is needed from this entity tag is these tags right here. The invulnerable, invisible, fixed, silent, and facing 1B. All of these are not necessarily needed, but I would suggest adding them in case something goes wrong. You will at least not have item frames in your world that are not there. But just for the sake of being able to easily see what's happening, I'm going to remove the invisible part of this, hit save, and then go over into Minecraft. So if everything went well, we can run /function walls.block::give items, and we will get our red emerald block, and we can place it down into the world, and it is an item frame. Because I made it non-invisible, you can actually see it, but it is there. But the important thing, and you can double check this, if you run a data get command and you're looking at it, you can just select the entity, hit enter, and you'll see that this entity has our tags that were in the give command. So it has was.itemFrameBlock and was.redEmeraldBlock. And so these are what you're going to be using to detect them. So definitely change, obviously, was to be whatever name you're going with. And then I would leave item frame block as the same. And then whatever you want your block to actually be referenced as, go here. So obviously we are making the red emerald block in this tutorial, but whatever you are making as a block, make that the same name. Okay, so we can place item frames. They have data that tells us what it is. Now what? Now that we have an item frame that we can detect the location of, now we just need to detect when we should look for that item frame. And to do that, we are going to create an advancement, and we're going to call this placed item frame. You could call this whatever you want, but might as well make your names very, very apparent. Inside a placed item frame, we are going to do basically just one thing. We are going to set up a requirement that's a trigger of item used on block, and it's going to look to the player and match their tool to see if they used a glow item frame or a regular item frame. I think I set it up like this because I use both of them for blocks, but you're probably just using item frame, so you could probably delete this. And then if this condition was met, we are going to run a function called was.block::placed item frame. This function doesn't yet exist, so let's create that. But first we can double check that this advancement actually correctly loaded by just trying to grant ourselves only. And if we were to run this, you don't want to, but you'll see that the advancement does exist, so it is all set up right. If it doesn't exist, look for typos in your advancement. And realize you can download the template data pack that I'm going through in this tutorial and just edit it, rather than trying to type everything yourself. It's going to be a whole lot easier. So now that we have an advancement that is calling a function, let's actually make the function that it's calling. So we can go back to our functions folder and create the placed item frame function. Inside of this function, we only actually need 2 lines of code. The first thing you should always think about when you are using an advancement is that you should revoke it at the very start of whatever function you're running. So that is this line here. And then our second one is actually really simple. We're just going to execute as all entities that have the tag of was.itemFrameBlock in a 10 block radius of us. And then we're going to execute at them and then run another function. So if you think about what is happening here, whenever we place this custom item frame that we have that has this tag here, we get an advancement. And when we get this advancement, it runs a function. And the function looks for everything that has this tag. So it basically looks for the block, or it looks for the item frame that we just placed. And because it's looking in a 10 block radius, it's always going to find it because the player doesn't have a long enough reach to place it further than that. And so then at that location, it is going to do whatever is in the check placed item frame. We don't currently have this function, so let's quickly make it. So we can create the check placed item frame, and this is going to be another really simple function. So what we want to do in here is we are going to kill it, kill the entity. So in this case, the item frame is going to die, but we're going to do it at the end. But before we do that, we're going to execute as the item frame that we were just checking. But in this case, we're going to look to see what type of block it is. So basically we're checking. So first we checked for all that have this tag, and now we're checking for all that have this tag. And if that step is a little confusing, we're doing this because for performance reasons, it's a whole lot better to look for all entities that have a certain tag and then run a list of tags that are unique to the specific entity. Because suppose we have 10 different types of emerald blocks that we've made, we can look for only one single tag of just a custom block, and then once we've determined what it is, we can say, okay, is it the blue emerald block? Is it the green emerald block? Is it the yellow emerald block, right? So in your code here, what you would want to do is you could copy this a couple times, and we could say we're looking for a blue emerald block, or we're looking for the yellow emerald block. I've realized green emerald block doesn't really make much sense because they kind of already are green, but yeah. And then in that situation, we are going to run a function called red emerald block place, or in this case, it would be blue emerald block place. And then we have yellow emerald block place. But we're only going to keep one of these for now, but that is how you would have multiple blocks set up. My assumption with this tutorial is most of you are not going to be stopping at just one block. You'll probably be making multiple, so I'm going to try to explain how you could set up multiple using this method. So now we're able to detect if a red emerald block has been placed. We know where it's been placed. So now we just need to run a function when we have the block placed to do a thing. So we just need to create a function in the red emerald block folder called place. So I mean, that's simple enough. Just create a folder called red emerald block and then put a function in here. All right, so we just create our place function, and when we load it, you'll see we have another very straightforward function. This one actually only needs to do two things. So we're going to start by setting a block at the location, and this is going to be whatever base block we want our block to be. So earlier we were looking at red stained glass. I'm going to go with that for the tutorial. Do realize this could in theory be anything you want. Secondly, what we want to do is we're going to summon an item display. And this is the same item display that we were looking at earlier in the tutorial. So we have a tag of that it's a custom block, a red emerald block, and there's the transformation showing that we have like the translation down a little or up a little bit. We have a slightly increased scale. And then this is the cool part. The item display displays the item frame that we used to place the block. So same model, we just get to display it right here. And so if we try this in game, now in theory, it still doesn't work. When we try this in Minecraft, make sure that you probably run the advancement revoke command for the placed item frame function. I ran into an issue where I had already placed it and this didn't work. But now in theory, when we place these, cool, we have a custom block. We can place it and it is beautiful, or yeah. It's a very red emerald, definitely. There's a little bit of jankiness, unfortunately, with like the outline. You can sometimes see through it a little bit, but overall it looks pretty good. Only problem is, yeah, we can't break it as of yet. These are, of course, still item displays, so we'd have to kill them to get rid of them. But that is the end of step 2. So at the end of step 2, in theory, you should be able to detect where the item frame that we're placing is, and then summon an item display at the location. One thing to note, if we use a block that does not let light through it, we are going to get slightly different results. So if we were to say use stone, you'll see when we place these down into the world, they are very dark. And that's because the item displays are displaying with light level 0. You can fix this by adding the brightness tag to your item display. So we can set it so that the brightness of each item display is always a sky level 15 and a block level 15. And if we try this one in game, you'll see that whenever I place the blocks, they are now very, very bright. And that is with them being stone. The only problem with this is, like, if we set the time to night, you'll see that these ones are still the same brightness, while the glass one that we had earlier does actually adjust in light level. So if you are needing a solid block, this unfortunately is the best you can do right now. But if you are fine with the block, the base block being transparent, like a glass or whatever, definitely go with this method. But yeah, that is the end of step 2. Let's move on to step 3. Step 3, detecting when the block should break. So because our block is actually an item display, and because the base block can be broken, we need to detect when the base block gets broken so that we can break the item display and get rid of it and give your item back. So to do that, I gave the item display 2 tags. We have one that just says it's a custom block, so you'll want it to be your name and then just custom block or something like that. And then we want another one to say what type of custom block it is. So in this case, it's wasd.redEmerald block, but this would just be whatever you've been calling your custom block. And so now we're going to need to create a lot of functions. So the first one we need is a tick function, because we do need these to have a bit of code running at them at all times. And just a reminder, with a tick function, we'll need to set up a Minecraft folder with a tags folder, with a functions folder, with a tick.json file. And in your tick.json file, you will just need to reference whatever you call your pack and the tick function's name. So in this case, we have tick.mc function. We only actually need one single command in here, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. We're just going to execute as all entities that are item displays that have the tag of was.customBlock, or whatever the tag you went for your custom blocks. And then we're going to execute at their location and run another function. And so the idea here is that we're basically saying, if we're a custom block, we should run something as a custom block. So we need that function. We called it as blocks, and we can check this one out. In the as blocks folder, we just need one single command per block. So this is going to be execute as all red emerald blocks to then run our red emerald tick function. So this is where you could add multiple of these, and you would add your blue emerald and your yellow emerald, right? And that would run as your blue emerald, and then your yellow emerald would run as the yellow emerald. And so that's how you could set up multiple blocks this way. Of course, the reason why we're doing it this way is just for performance reasons. But in this case, we are running a function called red emerald block in the red emerald block folder. So let's create that. All right, so navigating to the red emerald block folder, we can create the red emerald block.mc function and open it up. And funny enough, there's actually only one command we technically need for this. The rest would be for doing whatever functional thing you want your block to do. If you just want it to be a block, you only need one command. And that's really straightforward. We're just going to say execute unless the block that we're currently in is a red stained glass, or of course, this would be whatever base block you chose to go with. If it's not that block, we just run a function to break. We don't currently have this break function, so let's create it. All right, so we can create the break function. This is also in the red emerald block folder. And this function just needs to do 3 things. So we need to spawn a loot table into the world of the red emerald block so that we can get our block back. We could use a summon command to summon the item into the world, but if you use a loot table, it gets random motion that looks a whole lot better. But if you were to summon the item, it's just going to fall straight down. Looks a lot dumber, and so going with a loot table is the way to go. The second thing that we need to do is we need to get rid of the red stained glass that just appeared if the player mined it with Silk Touch, or if it's a different block, they might have just gotten it. So in this case, we're just going to execute as all items within 2 blocks of the item display. We're going to make sure that there's only one of them. We're getting the nearest one that has some NBT to it. The NBT we're looking for is if it's on the ground, we're going to ignore it. So this means it's going to be in the air, and then age of 0 is the main one that's important here. This means it can only have existed for 1 game tick. And then we just say, okay, is it a red item or a red stained glass? If it is, we are going to kill it. And then we end this by having the item display kill itself. Okay, so I know that might have been a lot, but we just set up a tick function that then calls an asBlocks function, and that asBlocks function finds the red emerald and runs the red emerald's tick, and then the red emerald's tick, if it decides that there's no block there, will kill itself and drop the loot. So if we can try this out, we'll see our block can still place, but now when we break it, nothing happens because I didn't reload. But if I were to actually reload, you'll see when we break it, it will just disappear, but nothing is dropped. That's because our final step is to set up that loot table. So if we go into our loot tables folder and we create the red emerald block.json file, this is our loot table that we are going to be running. Now the loot table itself is rather straightforward. We're basically just saying we're going to drop 1 item frame that has a bunch of NBT attached to it. That NBT is all just what was in our give items folder. It's literally just this right here. The only difference is if we go back to this, you'll notice, like if I put them side by side, there are backslashes wherever there's a quotation mark. So funny enough, you could literally just select all of the quotation marks and then go to the left of them and do a backslash. And this will be the exact same thing as what's in here. And so we could actually copy this over and check that out and see that, yeah, nothing changed. And I've mentioned this before, but Mizode has a really good loot table generator. If you're wanting to do it that way, you can go to his loot table generator and then use the function to set NBT right here, and then just paste the NBT of the item there, and it will do all of the backslashes for you and set up your whole loot table. I'll have this linked in the video's description. Cool. So now that we have this loot table, we can just double check that in our break function that we are running the loot table, and assuming it exists, it will work in Minecraft. So back in Minecraft, if I actually reload this time, you'll see we can place this down, and when we break it, we get the item. And it does have slightly different NBT, it seems. Right, because this one here has the invisible tag and this one doesn't. But if we change our give command to have the invisible tag like it should, when we go back into Minecraft, you'll see when we run the function to give ourselves the item that it will stack up properly. Though I'd actually need to, reload, and then yeah, it'll stack up with that one. And now we can remove these and you'll see that they all stack up nicely. And because we're, like I said, using a loot table, they will pop out with a bit of random motion, which is consistent with what items or blocks always do in Minecraft. And yeah, that is all there is to that tutorial. I know, whole lot of steps, pretty complicated, but in theory, once you've done one, there's just a bit of copy pasting you need to do and then some editing here and there, and you can get it to work. And what's cool about this method is that you can actually do all sorts of stuff besides, of course, just have it be a decorative block. Because we're running a function at the location, let's say we want to, I don't know, display a flame particle 2 blocks above the block. Well, this would normally be pretty difficult to do, but that was all that was needed to make that happen. And so making functional blocks that actually do cool stuff is really simple. Just figuring out what you want it to do when a condition is met or whatever will get you a quite cool result. So obviously particles displayed above the block is pretty boring, but there's all sorts of stuff that you can do. And if you've ever seen my machines data pack, you would know that there are very few limits for what you can have these custom blocks do. Yeah, definitely mess around with that and come up with some cool stuff. Well, that's all I have for this tutorial. Hopefully you were able to follow along and get a functional block out of it. If you weren't, feel free to join my Discord and ask for help there. If I have a chance, I will definitely lend a hand. But that's all I got. So if you enjoyed the tutorial, definitely leave a like on it. Subscribe if you want to not miss out on future tutorials and other content coming to the channel. And I'll see you guys all in the very next video. Thanks for watching.